This is the difference between great leaders and terrible leaders. You see, the truth is it's not just inner expectations, it's also outer expectations. And one of the hardest things, and LeBron says as well, one of the most challenging things about leadership is that when you win, one of my favorite stories is of John D. Rockefeller, because they realized the only gift that they could give him, the richest man in the world, the only gift that they could give him. Hey, welcome again to the Dan Owolabi Podcast. It is good to see you again, and I'm glad you're joining us because today we are talking about something that I believe is absolutely critical for your leadership. We're talking about the quiet crisis of leadership. What do I mean by the quiet crisis of leadership? What I mean is that when you think about leadership, and you think about the best leaders in history, you also have to think about some of the worst leaders in history. And oftentimes, with the best leaders in history and the worst leaders in history, you have a big difference between the way that they live their lives behind the scenes. Oftentimes, you don't realize that a leader is in crisis, that things are about to fall apart until things snap. It's almost like a bridge, right? You've got a bridge that cars drive over every day, and then all of a sudden, the bridge collapses and cars go down into the water. It's a horrible catastrophe, and people wonder, how did this happen? When did this happen? Well, the truth is, the bridge had been eroding. It had been rusting for years. And then there was a snap moment and everything came to a head. But if you said that the destruction happened in one moment, you'd be wrong because it had been happening for years. That's the quiet crisis of leadership. That's when the outward pressure of leadership becomes so great that it collapses your inward integrity. It means that sometimes, and this is the important part, sometimes your character is too weak to handle where your talent can take you. I'll say that again. Sometimes your character can be too weak to handle where your talent will take you. It's almost like you got rocket boosters if you're a talented leader and you're just shooting straight into the atmosphere. But the bad news is your fuselage has a crack in it. And as soon as you get into the atmosphere, it's going to start to disintegrate. The idea is that you have the ability to self-destruct. The higher you go in leadership, the harder it's going to get for you. The quiet crisis of leadership is the idea that your inner life isn't capable of handling the outward pressure. Now, there are a couple amazing stories about leaders that have imploded from the inside out. One of the ones that I tell on a regular basis is of a guy named John. Now, maybe you've heard of John before, and you for sure have seen the product that he made. I'll tell you the story. So John was an executive for General Motors. He was a young guy. He was a whiz kid. He had a lot of potential. He'd done a lot of incredible things. As his products became more popular, people started to understand his name and who he was, and he started to rise the ranks in General Motors, and people thought, man, this guy is amazing. Like, he was just creating cars, selling cars, understanding what the market needed. He was just amazing. Had a wife, a couple kids. And then one day, he's in his early 40s, late 30s. He has the opportunity to go see a retired General Motors executive. This guy has already sort of rode off in the sunset. He's done. He's at his house and he's doing his own thing. And so John has a chance to go visit him, right? And there's 30, 40 years difference in age. So he goes and visits this older guy. The guy's in his 80s and he walks into the guy's house and John is shocked. I mean, he has this existential moment where he's talking to this guy. And instead of saying, man, I'm a multimillionaire. I had an amazing career at General Motors. I can look back at my life and say, these are all the things that I accomplished. The guy he's talking to, the retired executive, is miserable. He's lonely. He's bitter. And so John, looking at this moment, he has this epiphany where he's like, wow, that's where I'm going to end up. Like, this is how my life is going to end. If I don't fix things, I'm going to be like this old millionaire with zero friends, zero fun, and a lot of bitterness. I've got to do something. Now, here's the thing. This is the difference between great leaders and terrible leaders. You see, great leaders will say, I need to do something, and they'll look inward. What do I need to fix about myself? My identity, my reason for doing this, so that when I get to the top, I'm not at the top all by myself. I have my friends and my family around me. I have a big purpose that I was chasing that I accomplished. I feel like I'm doing something important with my life and I know that it mattered and I helped a lot of people and da-da-da-da-da. That's looking inward. That's not what John did. He doubled down on the other stuff. So immediately he goes back home. Within a couple months, he divorces his wife. He leaves his kids. He marries another woman. He keeps at his job, but he ramps up the hours. I mean, he goes from working 40 hours a week to like 80 hours a week. Now he's really just pumping because by golly, he is not going to be forgotten like this guy. He gets surgery on his chin, so his chin is just like a chiseled jaw. I mean, he looks good. He loses 40 pounds, starts writing a book. I mean, he's going to do it all. He's not going to be like this washed up old General Motors executive. That's not going to be him. He's going to leave a freaking legacy. He's going to be amazing. And so a couple of years later, he's doing amazing at General Motors. He is top of the world, more famous than he's ever been. And then he leaves the company, burns all the bridges on his way out, says, you know what, screw you guys. And he starts his own car company, right? And here's the thing. The car company that he starts is called, this was named after him in his own last name, the DeLorean Car Company. The DeLorean Car Company had a massive head start because it was featured in Back to the Future. If you ever watched the movie, you'll know that the DeLorean car was the car, and it was absolutely incredible. People lined up, paid extra to buy this car, to be the first one in. He was going to develop this new car. It was going to be amazing. And what happened was it was an unbelievable flop. He went from one crisis to another. The car was slow. It was expensive. It didn't work the way it was supposed to. He overpromised and underdelivered, got caught in his ego. And eventually, true story, John DeLorean ended up in a hotel room trying to get money to keep his company afloat. And he was exchanging drugs. Essentially, he was trying to sell cocaine in order to get enough money to keep his company afloat. And at the end of the day, it was actually an FBI sting. He went straight to jail. Now, from somebody at the top of his game to somebody sitting in a federal jail cell is a terrible story, but it's an example of that inner implosion, right? So people will ask, gosh, what happened to John DeLorean? I mean, that guy was on top of the world, and then all of a sudden he just fell off his rocker. No, that's actually not what happened. It was a slow erosion over time. Why do I tell you this story? I tell you this story because this is what happens to even the most talented leaders. Your talent can take you to places that your character can't handle. There will be moments when the pressure on the outside becomes greater than your integrity on the inside. And the only thing that will keep you in those moments is the work that you've done behind the scenes for years to build up the integrity, that feeling on the inside that I am who I am and I'm doing important work and I'm valuable and I understand why I'm doing this. And it's not about the show and it's not about the money and it's not about all the other things. It's about my inner purpose. That clarity is what's going to keep you focused. And so this episode is all about helping you understand the quiet crisis of leadership, why great leaders implode, and why you, as someone who's developing something, who's building something that matters, can withstand even the most difficult moments of high intensity and difficult pressure. All right, so here's the big thing. Here's what you need to know. How in the world do you develop a story of success that doesn't mimic John DeLorean? How do you avoid that, where you are unbelievably talented, but your integrity isn't strong enough to help you get where you know that you can go, or your talent can take you? Well, before we show you exactly how you can avoid that, you've got to understand the three things that erode your talent, the three things that erode your performance from the inside out, the quiet crisis of leadership. There's three things that really, if you don't get a handle on these three things, it will for sure erode you from the inside out. Here are the three right now. The first one is speed. The second one is isolation. And then third one, this one's important, expectation. I'll tell you what I mean in a second. The first one is speed. Now, here's the thing. When somebody texts you, how quickly do you feel like you have to answer? Like, how fast do you feel like you have to respond? And if you don't respond right away, if you give, a couple hours, maybe a couple days, whatever, a couple minutes, how do you feel about your relationship with the person that you texted? See, the thing is, oftentimes too many leaders are addicted to speed. Speed is a sign of competence. When people text you or they email you, you feel like you have to respond in minutes. And that's a cultural thing for sure. You feel like that is really, really important. But the truth is, we say this all the time. The best leaders understand this. Time is more valuable than money. And so oftentimes, the best leaders have learned not to give their time away to whoever asks. And so when somebody texts you and you feel like you have to respond to them immediately, right away, it's almost like opening up your wallet and being like, hey, you want some time? You want some time? You want some time? I'm going to give my time to whoever asks. You see, what happens is the best leaders recognize that time is a valuable commodity, and they don't allow the trap of feeling that they always have to respond immediately. If they have to get things done ASAP. They recognize that there are things that are priorities, and then there are things that are not priorities. They don't try to do everything. They try to do a few things really, really well. And so oftentimes that means picking and choosing who you respond to, when you respond to them, what you do and what you don't do, because you are in charge of your time. The leaders that implode from the inside, they just keep running and running and running and running and running, and their inner RPMs, like in a car, just goes off the rails. The more successful they get, the faster they run, and that shouldn't be the case. The second one is isolation. Now, this one is a tricky one because oftentimes if you are leading a company or you're an entrepreneur or you're building something important, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy. In fact, the time that maybe you would have spent hanging out with other people, you're actually working. You're trying to make this happen. You're putting the extra time, the extra effort, and there's no way around it. To do something very, very, very significant, it takes time. And you're not the kind of person that doesn't want to do the hard work. You're willing to do the hard work. You're willing to get in there and do the hard things that it takes to make this thing happen. But the truth is, for you and for me, when you're focused on doing things that are hard and you really, really work hard on it over time, you tend to separate yourself. You spend a little less time with people that, just want to shoot the breeze. It's harder and harder to develop relationships over time. Not because you don't want to develop relationships. It's because you're focused on other things that in the moment in time, in that season of your life, are very, very important. So the truth is, oftentimes, the higher you go in leadership, the harder it becomes to develop relationships, to have peers. Now, this isn't just because you're busy, and it isn't because you have a lot of things going on and not a lot of time to hang out with people. It's also because people tend to look at you differently. The more successful you become, the more people start to treat you a little bit differently. Like if you work for a large company and you get a promotion and you get a sweet corner office, they tell you your new responsibilities. They tell you what you're doing now. They tell you how you're going to help the company. They tell you, this is why you have this role. What they don't tell you is the fact that everyone who walks into your new office now, they're going to want something from you. And they're going to have a little bit of resentment because you're now their boss. And it's going to be hard to be completely yourself around hardly anybody. Now that you have this big old office and this, brand new responsibility and you're doing things on a larger stage, it's going to be harder to make friends. It's going to be harder to have relationships. One of my favorite authors, Arthur Brooks, has an amazing quote. I'll read it to you here. Here's what he says. He says, leaders are particularly prone to loneliness, in no small part because real friendships at work are difficult or impossible with people under one's authority and supervision. It is hard to be friends with people who you sign their paychecks for. It is just really hard to have those relationships. And it's not because you're not trying, it's because they look at you funny. They look at you like an ATM. They're like, I got to laugh at your jokes because you're my boss. And so it's hard to make friends with people at work. And the truth is, for you and for me and for people who are experiencing real leadership tension, oftentimes it's hard to go down the street and knock on the CEO's door down the hall or down the street and be like, hey man, you want to hang out? It becomes really difficult. So isolation is a real thing. The next thing is expectation. Now, this one is huge because when you think about expectation, it's incredible how expectations shape us. You see, for you and for me, most leaders have an image of their ideal self in mind. They know who they want to be, and they are trying to close the gap between who they are and who they want to be. The real them and then the ideal them. They're trying to close that gap, and they're working as hard as they possibly can. In the back of their mind, and maybe the back of your mind, there's this idea that if I just ate a little bit better, if I just woke up a little bit earlier, if I just exercised a little bit more, if I just read a few more books, if I just went a couple more seminars, if I just met a few more people, then I would be the ideal version of myself. And they work like crazy to close that gap of expectation. They expect themselves to be further at this point, to be better at this point, to have done more with the resources in front of them. They have high expectations for themselves. That's why you are in the position you're in. That's why leaders are who they are. But it's those expectations oftentimes, if you're not careful, can erode you from the inside out. You see, the truth is it's not just inner expectations, it's also outer expectations. One of the most challenging things about leadership, LeBron James says this, is that when you win, you've got to keep on winning. If people think you're a winner, you cannot lose. You have to keep winning. And so if you're the top salesman in your company, or you've built an incredible company as an entrepreneur, well, I mean, people are going to expect the winning to keep on coming. If you had a great quarter last quarter and you hired a bunch of people and now you've got a budget to actually handle those people, well, you better have another great quarter too. And then another great quarter after that. You've got to keep the thing going because people expect you to. It starts out as like, oh, wow, this is nice. And then it turns into, we expect you to do this every week. And that kind of pressure, external expectations, oftentimes creates the perfect recipe for leadership implosion, the quiet crisis of leadership. So if you combine speed, you combine isolation, you have no one to talk to, and then you combine expectations, all those things together, that's when the bridge starts to collapse. Now, here's the thing you've got to understand. If you're leading today in 2026, you are leading in a brand new day. Like you are leading in an environment that has never existed before in human history. This leadership moment that you and I are in is completely different, and it's important to understand why. And it's also important to understand that you need different tools than your dad used or your mom used or your grandpa or grandma used. Leadership today is very, very different than how it used to be. Let me tell you why. So if you go back to anything before 1980, you would almost never hear anything about leadership. You would hear maybe a few things here or there, maybe when it came to politicians and that kind of stuff, but not for business. What you heard more often than not, by far, was this word, management. People were management consultants. You would get a business management degree, right? You would understand more about management than anything. It's because what your job was, if you were stepping into a higher rank, if you got promoted, your job was to manage two things, to manage numbers and then the time it took to produce the numbers. That's all you had to manage, right? So you have to manage the people who are making the numbers and the amount of time it took those people to produce the numbers. So you're only thinking about management. And then all of a sudden, things shift. You get into the mid-'80s, you start to move into the '90s, and the word leadership starts to creep in. Now it's not just about management. I mean, management is important. You got to manage the numbers, right? You manage numbers, but you lead people. So now you're talking about character. You're talking about values. You're talking about vision. You're talking about all these sort of nebulous things that, hey, look, if you're really going to be somebody worth your salt, you've got to have all of this stuff, leadership, you've got to have values, vision, you've got to have character, all these things that are super important that we understand as big deals today. That was new. But you add that on top of being able to manage the numbers and manage the time. And then you step into the 21st century, and all of a sudden, it's not just management when it comes to leading a company and leading an organization that's making a difference. It's not just about leadership in particular. Now it's about brand. Like you got to manage your social media brand. Like you got to be out there. You got to say something cool on TV. You got to understand. You got to say something cool on social media. You got to make sure that everybody knows what you stand for, and you got to be really clear, and you got to be really witty about it, and you've got to be really funny about it. And you got to make sure that you're present and people know you. And when they think of you, they think of a particular image. And so now you're managing your brand, your public brand. You got to be out there, but then you're also managing your leadership, and now you're also being a manager of your company, and all of that. The public pressure, the private pressure, the personal pressure, all of that creates an environment where it becomes even more difficult to do something important. The higher you go in leadership, the more pressure you face. And it becomes more difficult now than it's ever been before to lead at a high level without having an inner implosion. So, how do you avoid that? Well, I'm going to give you 3 specific things that you can do to make sure that you don't live out the story of John DeLorean, that you don't move into a place where you have that quiet crisis of leadership, where you're eroding from the inside out and nobody knows it until that moment of implosion. I'm going to give you 3 specific things that you can do. Here are the 3 right now. The first one, you've got to replace isolation with safety. Number 2, you've got to replace speed with space. And number 3, you've got to replace expectations with community. Let me start at the top. You've got to replace isolation with safety, number one. Now, when I say replace isolation with safety, what I mean is you need to find a space of psychological safety. You need to find a place where you are okay being you in the presence of other people. You need to find a place where you can just be you, right? And you can also be you in the presence of other people who will call you out on your stuff. They are there to help you get better. They understand who you are, and they are always there to just be honest with you. Now, it doesn't mean they have to be your best friends. It can be people on your team, right? It can be people that you're working with on a regular basis, but you've created an environment where there's back and forth, where they feel like they can challenge you. They can bring critical feedback. They can be open to you about things that aren't going right and things that are going right. They're not always laughing at your jokes. They're not always believing everything you say. They're asking for evidence. They're the kind of people that you want to have around. You want to surround yourselves with advisors, not admirers. You want to find enough safety where you can just be yourself and people can say, hey, I like you for who you are, but I also like you enough to not allow you to stay the way you are. They want you to get better. You replace isolation with safety. Now, one of the things I love about this is that when you get into a position where you are always isolated, you start to turn inward. You start to become the kind of person that only is able to justify your behavior to yourself. You're the kind of person that will take no feedback from anyone else, and whenever somebody else challenges you, you're always defensive. That's what happens with increased isolation. One of my favorite theologians, St. Augustine, called it incurvat and stay. And what he meant by that was he said that essentially the self turns inward. The fewer and fewer people you have around you who can direct your attention out from yourself, you'll eventually become all about yourself. You'll turn inward. Now, when you surround yourself with people who care about you, but also will not let you stay the way you are, now you have psychological safety. Now you can say dumb things. You can say things that are just works in progress. You can say things that just come off the top of your head, and you know that the people you're talking to, well, they're going to treat you with grace and respect, but they're also going to hold you accountable. You can get better with those people. So that's the first thing. Replace isolation with safety to be human. Now, the second thing is really, really important. You've got to replace speed with space. There comes a point in your entrepreneurial journey where you realize that the faster I go doesn't necessarily mean the better I get. Sometimes there's a position when you lead an organization where what you really need more than anything is space and time and a minute to just think. Time blocked off in your calendar to read, to think deeply, to try to become the kind of person that's a non-anxious presence when everybody else around you is losing their mind. That kind of leadership is invaluable. It's critical for you and I as leaders to replace speed with space. You can't use speed as a badge of honor. You've got to have time blocked out in your calendar to say, this is when I'm going to do this, and this is when I'm going to do this. One of the things I love about my days is that I have my time blocked off, get this, between 6 a.m. and 12:30. In that time span, I am answering 0 emails. I'm answering 0 text messages. I've talked to my team. I've told them, hey, look, I'm not taking any appointments between 6 a.m. and 12:30. Now, it's amazing how much you can get done between 12:30 and 6, between dinner time. When you know that I have a limited amount of time to get this done, I got to pack as many meetings and emails and stuff as I possibly can. But that time before 12:30 is all about space. Time to work out and be healthy, time to spend time with my family, time to read deeply, time to write critically, time to think. That kind of stuff, that kind of space, that does wonders for your inner life. And it helps you become the kind of person that can withstand external pressure. Replace speed with space. Here's the last one. The last one is this. The last one is you have to replace expectations with community. Now, when I say you have to replace expectations with community, what I mean is you have to replace expectations with community, but it's specifically community that does not need you to perform. We're not talking about your team here. We're talking about your church, if you go to church. We're talking about a group of people, maybe your family, that they love you, but they don't need you to be Superman. They don't want to see your cape. They just want you to be you. That sense of community where you don't have to meet anyone's expectations. You need to show up and just be you. When you replace expectations with community, what you have is a space, a literal space in your life where you can go and you can let your hair down. You can just be you because people know who you are. They value what you bring to the table, but they don't need you. They're not dependent on you. They're not relying on you to perform. They're okay on their own. They just want you to be there for you. When you replace expectations with community, specifically community of people who do not want you to perform in any particular way, then all of a sudden, now you have a firm foundation. You can develop that inner integrity without feeling like you have to perform everywhere you go. Some of the best leaders that I know lead in every single sphere of life. They lead in their church. They're on boards in their community. They lead in their company. Shoot, they get on a biking club and they're the lead guy, and everyone's sort of trailing after them. They're leading everything they do. There's got to be a place where you do not lead. You are just you. One of my favorite stories is of John D. Rockefeller. If you're not familiar with his story, he was the originator of Standard Oil, and he was, a lot of people say, the richest person ever, especially adjusted for inflation. He was one of the richest people ever. One of the things that was so interesting about him was that even when he was at the height of his wealth, he had unbelievable power, unbelievable wealth, and unbelievable expectations. He still had a small group of people where he could just show up and he was just John. Not John, the richest guy in the world, not John, owner of Standard Oil, not John, the guy who employs half the city, not that guy. He was just John. And you want to know what that place was? That was his local tiny church. He would just show up, sit in the pews with everybody else. I mean, you're talking like 50 people and him, right? And pastor preaches, and he's sitting there with everybody else, and he walks out just like everybody else. He teaches Sunday school just like everybody else, right? And there were some weird moments where people would show up just because, hey, they want something from him, and everyone in the church knew that that guy back there is there because John's here, and he wants something from John. But for the most part, people there, they just let him be him because they realized the only gift that they could give him, the richest man in the world, the only gift that they could give him was the ability to just be himself in a safe space, right? In a community full of people that did not expect anything from him. You've got to find a space like that, and you've got to find it fast. The higher you go in leadership, the harder it is to find spaces like that. One of the things that we realized in branches is that that's what entrepreneurs, that's what owners, that's what executives need. And so we have designed our consulting firm to really lean on the community. There's 1,000 ways that we can help a leader grow his company, grow her company. But one of the best things that we can do is we can offer community. We can create a space where you can have candid conversations with people who don't want anything from you. They just want you to succeed, both personally and professionally. They want you to win at home. They want you to win at work. And so those are the kind of people that you want to surround yourself with. And we've realized that providing community, giving people space to think, right? Not just to speed up, and giving people an opportunity to just be human is one of the best things you could do to accelerate their growth and make them better. So if you want to avoid the quiet crisis, if you want to be the kind of person that can handle the pressure, if you want to get better and better in your leadership and handle even more responsibility without imploding on the inside, like our good friend, John DeLorean, you got to understand how to replace speed. You got to understand how to replace isolation. And you got to understand how to replace expectations. And when you do that, then you'll be immune from the quiet crisis.